Welcome to the Intelligent Business Show, a podcast from Aberdeen discussing the latest trends to keep you and your business at the top of your class. And now, here's your host, Aberdeen's CMO in residence, Matthew Grant.
Hello and welcome to the Intelligent Business Show, the podcast that focuses on how organizations just like yours are using data to make their business more intelligent. I'm your host, Matthew Grant, CMO in residence here at Aberdeen. This week, we're speaking with Blair Newman, CTO at Bell Integrator, a global consulting and technology services provider driving innovation and enabling digital transformation within the finance, telecom, retail, and automotive industries. Bell Integrator recently released an intriguing neural network framework for AI applications. I wanted to know more, so we invited Blair to the show. Let's dive in. So, Blair, welcome to the Intelligent Business Show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. I really appreciate it.
Oh, cool, because there's a lot of cool things that we can talk about today. And specifically, I wanted to start out talking about the approach that you and Bell Integrator take to selling technology. So specifically, before the show, you told me a story about working with a client and building an augmented reality app for them. I was wondering if we could, talk about that story a little bit. So give us some background. How did this all come about?
Yeah, absolutely. So now it's been, quite frankly, a couple of years since I guess you might say we kind of started on our own digital transformation journey. And as a part of this journey, we decided to, as you might say, reinvent ourselves and begin that process of creating a number of digital solutions, which is one part of it, but also creating digital solutions that really focused on enabling our customers to, let's say, begin to monetize the technology, right? Because, you always hear, Matt, about these discussions about, you should use artificial intelligence, or in this particular case, kind of the tip of the spear for us was augmented reality. But as we began to, let's say, have these discussions with our customers, they said, I know I should begin using augmented reality, but how can I really begin to use it and it helps, let's say, really drive value in my business, specifically from a revenue perspective. Right. So this was our objective in this particular case, and in the story or in the experience that you're referencing, we had the opportunity to engage a fairly large auto parts retailer who we approached and we began a discussion about augmented reality. And their initial response, which we had been hearing from other customers, is, yeah, it's great, but I don't think it really applies to our business. And at that point, I was a part of the conversation, and at Bell Integrator, we've really started taking a different approach instead of, let's say, really focusing on technology, but really focusing on business value.
Yep.
And one of the, let's say, shorter paths to help our customers realize that value is, of course, at least for myself, I kind of think about myself as a consumer.
Yeah.
And one of the discussions, I began engaging them on, and to some degree, they kind of thought our presentation was over. And I say, I was actually just, in your retail store, and I needed some windshield wipers. I needed headlamp, a tail light, and I began explaining to them, really just how painful it was going into their store, but also more importantly, how painful it was for the associate that was helping me. Yep. To as well, right? What's your car vehicle, what's your make, what's your model, all the way down to eventually asking me, what's my VIN number, which, I've heard that term before, but it's like, now you're asking me to go and actually find this particular number, right? And I told them, I said, well, wouldn't it be just functionally much more efficient if I was just able to just take my phone and point my phone at my vehicle, and it told me what my vehicle was.
Yep.
And in turn, it also told me which parts were associated with my vehicle. Instead of pulling out these huge binders and flipping and flopping them around and the sales associate is trying to help me, and they had like 4 or 5 people, waiting, and they said, yeah, that would be fantastic. And I said, well, then wouldn't it also be extremely nice if at that point I was able to visually see, the product that I was looking for, so that I could validate that that's indeed what I wanted to purchase. They said, yeah, that would be fantastic. And I said, well, then what about if, you enabled your customers to then purchase that particular product? Oh, yeah, that would be fantastic. And I said, well, what I just described to you is what we can do for you with augmented reality.
Right.
And really then at that moment, we always talk about, oh, the light bulb went off.
Yep.
And for them at that point, the light bulb went off, and they said, oh, wow, okay, I see how augmented reality can really help our organization. And in this particular case, really begin to drive and grow value, our revenues more specifically for them.
Right. So that's the story, right?
Mm-hmm.
And and there's so many things I like about that story. I mean, part of it because I was thinking in the back of my mind, like you're right, people, especially technology vendors, you can fall in love with the technology. And some of the stuff is really cool and, almost miraculous, depending on how old you are. Stuff that was inconceivable, like when I was young, is commonplace to my kids. So, but what I love there is that ultimately you were able to back into the technology conversation by focusing on the thing that really matters, this kind of customer pain. And it was one of those situations where you could actually tell everyone's been to an auto parts store. You can talk about how complicated it is and how it's weird, even how old-fashioned it feels. I mean, I had to replace a headlamp a couple months ago, and you go in there, it's, like you're saying, you literally are getting out these books. Like, it's nuts. But I thought it was cool, too, kind of and this is where we start talking about what's possible. Like, as you said, your customer and things you had heard before is they just didn't believe it was applicable to their business. Like, people hear about all these cool things, but you also were able, by focusing on the customer, to paint this picture of what you could do with the technology. And to my mind, it seems like you at least brought together 3 different things. You brought together image recognition technology. You brought together connections to specific databases, parts database, car databases, and things like that. Plus, on top of it, by tying it into allowing customers to make a purchase from it, now you've actually plugged it directly into that company's sort of operational infrastructure. I'm just wondering if, for these different pieces, is bringing in any one particular piece the most challenging part, or is once you've sold the concept, is it relatively straightforward to weave these things together into a sort of augmented reality solution like you just described?
Yeah, I mean, I think you raise a great point. I mean, we kind of initially started the discussion talking about augmented reality, but I think when speaking with the customer, almost to some degree, we almost try to take an approach of really just setting the technology aside for a second, right? And we're simply just saying, okay, what can we do to help you get your products and services into the fingertips of your customers the most efficient way possible, right? And in having that conversation, as I began to kind of articulate, well, I really don't want to thumb through this huge binder that you have in front of me. I really don't know my make and model. I mean, I know that I have a Volkswagen, and I really for sure don't want to go and look for my VIN number.
Right.
And oh, by the way, you really do have 3 or 4 customers that's waiting behind me, as both me and your sales associate kind of just look at each other and say, what do we do?
Right.
And once, we kind of had that discussion, and I'm bringing them a solution to that particular business problem.
Right.
Then at that point, I mean, that's the barrier of success. And then you sprinkle in okay, I can help your customers visualize what they're purchasing with augmented reality.
Right.
I can, oh, by the way, we haven't even discussed artificial intelligence. How am I identifying the car? That's artificial intelligence. And then you mentioned just really just a key point, because data and content is really what I like to believe is defining a lot of organizations' value moving forward. So now we're able to take these, new and emerging or untapped technologies and connect them to something that is really meaningful to our customers, right? To their back end, database as it relates to inventory, to their CRM, so that we can connect with their customers, and then of course directly to their bottom line in the form of some commerce, whether it's conducting the transaction through the application, or whether it's simply just driving users into the store, right? Because they're receiving some pressures from an online perspective as well. So that's so far has proven to be extremely successful for us, where we kind of just set the technology aside.
Yeah.
Really identify what addresses some of their needs.
Yeah, no, I mean, I love that. And listeners, if you take anything away from this podcast today, I think that's a key lesson of the technology itself. Ultimately, it's just a tool to obtain a certain objective, and that objective is resolving specific, picturable, experienceable pain points, and you painted a very vivid picture for that customer. So since you mentioned AI, I'll be honest, what brought Bell Integrator to my attention originally was the announcement of your release of Newton, which you guys call a, quote, disruptive neural network framework and an AutoML, ML being machine learning solution. So I was wondering if you could kind of unpack that all for us, and maybe start with talking about what exactly is an AutoML solution, and then we'll get into what's a neural network framework, and beyond that into what people can do with all this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you kind of just to maybe summarize things, kind of just briefly,
please
step back to the example of the auto parts retailer.
Yep.
When we, let's say, built this application that recognizes cars, right? We needed to, in effect, leverage a technology that allows for the application that when your phone takes a picture of a vehicle, that it can search for and identify that vehicle, right? And if you think about it, there's a number of different angles and ways, let alone vehicles that are out, a number of different angles that you can take a picture of a car, right? Yep. And there's a number of different vehicles that are out there, right? And when you begin to talk about, let's say, machine learning, it's basically, how there's some technology that allows for us to simulate, for all intents and purposes, how we would process things, right? When you think about it, we don't just keep in our near-term memory that, every different vehicle that is out there. It's oftentimes only once when we're, looking at a particular vehicle, then, we go into our long-term memory bank and we say, oh, okay, that's a Mercedes-Benz, right? And machine learning is technology's attempt to begin to replicate what the human brain does, right? Yep. And this is also, you may hear also, say deep learning as well.
Yep.
So machine learning, which you often hear tied to artificial intelligence, is a particular approach to enabling technology to gather and to recall a certain amount of data accurately, right? And so in this particular case, when we're talking about vehicles, we want a solution, a technical solution that allows, when the customers come up randomly and they identify a particular picture, that we can then identify that vehicle.
Right.
And how we accomplish this, very similar to how we you might teach your child is if you remember back when you were in grade school and you began learning your numbers, right? There were some flashcards, right?
Yeah.
And someone or your teacher would show you a flashcard and you would say, oh, that's a dog, right? That's a cat, right? And in this particular case, we want to teach our technology what different vehicles look like, right? And we do this in the form of training. So we begin to train what are called models, the ability to identify, in this particular case, a vehicle. And to give you an example, when we did this particular solution, this is before we developed Newton, we had our technical solution go back to identify cars roughly 25 years ago. Mm-hmm. And it took us, in order to do this, it took us well over 5 million images that we had to feed into, let's say, our database to train our solution as to what different vehicles look like, so that when someone took a picture, it could effectively search this database and identify this vehicle. And what's used as a means, or the engine which allows the technology to search this database efficiently, it's what's called an algorithm. Yep. So there are a number of different algorithms that enable, let's say, artificial intelligence or technology to effectively search vast amounts of data, right? And as you might imagine, data can be very expensive. It can be proprietary. And the more data that you have, right, typically the slower the calculations will be. Right. And this is one of the different barriers when we begin to talk about our artificial intelligence is, let's say, the amount of data that you need in order to produce a model that's efficient is just humongous. Right. And then, of course, it not only has to produce an answer, it has to produce an accurate answer, right? So when we first built this application, it took us, let's say, well over 5 million images just to go back, let's say, 25 years with a certain subset of vehicles. And we began to look at, the performance is not where we want it to be. Do our customers have all of the data that we need, right? Does that auto parts manufacturer have all of the data that they need in order to effectively produce a solution? And we began, again, not focusing on the technology, but focusing on the customer problem, the customer experience. And we began the process of developing our own algorithm that allows for us to produce the same level of accuracy with not as much data. Wow. Right? Because at that point, right, we begin to be in a position where we can train our models much more efficiently with less data, but also we began to produce a more faster model. And let me give you an example, right? So when we produced this solution, the model came out and it was probably almost close to a gigabyte. Right. And we were able to reduce the number of samples that we needed, 5 million, to now roughly around 100,000. And our model size went from being close to a gigabyte to being roughly around 30K. Wow. Now, what does this mean? And what is it? And how does this bring?
No. If I could just interrupt you just for a second, because this is all, it's fascinating stuff. Because first of all, I didn't realize that actually. So it got me thinking about a couple of things. What I wanted to say is, on the one hand, it hadn't occurred to me that you guys had actually developed this auto recognition system, and which I think is cool enough. It does make me start thinking about the idea that maybe down the road, when you want to put together an app like this, someone will already have put together, well, there's my dog recognition system, and here's my tree recognition system, and you can just use them. Mm-hmm. So, but I think that's wild. So you were saying, and it's always been my understanding with neural nets and as a kind of a model for doing machine learning, that it's this sample size is what's really key to it. Because as you pointed out, a picture of a car, there's, even with different models, can have different colors. There's going to be different light conditions and stuff like that. So you got to kind of feed all these different variables into your system. It's just crazy that you were able to cut it down, as you just said, basically from 5 million to 100,000. I mean, is it just because the other systems are super inefficient or something? Like, how is that even possible? You're blowing my mind.
Yeah, so I always like to say it's okay to love technology, but you have to be in love with your customer, right? So because you're right. Normally or historically, machine learning is associated with needing to sort through and analyze large amounts of data,
Yeah.
right? And let's just say there's I remember some time ago used to be there is that herd mentality, right, that is out there, that if this is how it's been, this is how you must continue to do it, right? And that's what we see today. We see that still people are in love with technology. They go and they meet their customers and they try to sell technology, and then every once in a while there's an outlier, and we like to believe that we're outliers in this particular case, where we decided, where we say, hey, you always talk about there's a paradigm shift, but let's look at things a little bit differently. We know this is what everyone else is doing, but let's begin to look at things differently. So instead of focusing on the technology, we're focused a little bit more on the customer. We're saying, what can we begin to do to help our customer have different results?
Right.
And I think when you begin to have this approach and mindset of looking at things, let's say, outside of technology, every once in a while you have the opportunity to do something that is vastly different, and you are able to realize those results. And in this particular case, we have. So our solution is not dependent upon leveraging or needing vast amounts of data. Typically, our customers, we'll meet with some data scientists, and they'll say, oh, we train, or we, give our system all of the data that we have. And we come in and we say, well, we're able to just take 1% of that data and still produce the same level of accuracy.
Wow.
We'll take 1% of that data. Now you have a much smaller model size, which now empowers our customers to begin to leverage artificial intelligence in a completely different way.
Right.
Now you're really able to embed, let's say, these AI models into microcontrollers, right? So we began a process actually of just opening up different markets and different applications as it relates to AI, because specifically machine learning. And this is one of the technology breakthroughs that we've introduced, is our solution is not dependent on significant amounts of data, and that's because our algorithm is not based upon all of the traditional frameworks that you may hear about out there, whether it's TensorFlow, whether it's PyTorch, et cetera. Newton is an algorithm that we've developed in-house.
Nice. So first of all, I love this idea of once you set technology aside and focus on the customer, it actually ends up, and even getting into the customer's pain, right? To your point, the auto parts store is trying to solve a problem for their customer, but in order to do the solution, they might find they have another problem, like they don't have the data. And so now you're trying to solve that problem for them, and that makes you look at the technology in a new way. So I know we're getting to the end of our show here, so I was just wondering if, in this final bit, if you could talk about what are customers or what are the people you're working with actually doing with Newton? Yeah, just as from a kind of practical application standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll kind of just tie off on the AutoML component, right? So we talked about machine learning.
Oh, perfect, yes.
And the AutoML component is now, how do we automate that, right?
Yep.
And so one thing is we're looking to give the technology, and then the other thing is how do we automate it so that we can increase the usability for our customers, right? So in order to take advantage really of machine learning to its fullest extent today, you typically need to have a data scientist. You typically need to have some developers, et cetera, that on staff that can help you achieve, let's say, some of the results. And really, our focus area is really about producing a solution that enables our customers to not only realize the technology, but realize the benefits, but also do it without the dependency of, of those data scientists, right? So that's the AutoML component, is we're automating the machine learning. And a number of our customers, I mean, we're kind of touching in a couple of different areas. Newton is, we're not focused on any specific domain.
Sure.
So we're able to help some customers with, we're talking about employee churn. So we're able to help one particular customer in the educational space who is just looking to understand turnover. And they had all of the various metrics about, their employees that you could imagine, how long they've been employed, how often they travel, if they're investing in retirement. I mean, you name it, right? But they want something out of it, right? And so they're able to just simply just take our solution, upload their data to our solution via a browser, and at that point, select what they want to predict upon, and then, realize the benefits and the results of a model that helps them identify who they feel that may be at risk. And the next evolution of our solution is also then making recommendations for our customer on what they could do to offer their offer their employees so that they no longer become at risk, right? So we're kind of, in that particular case, we're really kind of focused on the complete cycle. We're also working with on the telecommunication side, where we're enabling some of our customers to, let's say, be more efficient with their spectrum, right? We're also working with we're doing some more work on the automotive side as well. One of the things that Newton is focused on right now, we're doing classification and regression, and now from an AutoML perspective, we're looking to release some image recognition, and so we're also working on the automotive side regarding image recognition as well.
Wow.
And this will be in our next general release. Will include image recognition in the next release of Newton.
Nice. So I think just then to kind of bring this to a close, what this is all making me think about is something you said when we first spoke, was that eventually all technology becomes a commodity. And even as you're talking through these things, like if you develop an algorithm that everyone can use, now you having that algorithm doesn't become a real differentiator for you anymore. Or if you've invented image recognition sort of framework, and then anyone can start applying it, again, that just now becomes something everyone can use. So, so would you say that given this basic principle, all technology becomes a commodity, the only way for technology companies to avoid kind of becoming obsolete or getting commoditized is to continually focus on customer and customer pain?
Yeah, you basically have two options. You either you're a giant and you're in this acquisition mode because you're picking up new technologies because you're not innovating, or the services that you're providing your customers resonate in a way that's not associated with technology, right? So if you look at the auto parts company, right? I would probably say they don't see us as a technology company, right? I would say that now they're coming to us with business problems that they have. They're not coming to us saying, Blair or Bell, can you give us, the next, fastest mousetrap, right?
Yeah.
They're coming to us with business problems, and they're entrusting that we will come back not only with a solution, right? But also we're coming back with a means to implement that solution so that it can be realized.
Nice.
Right? Because there's a lot of, consultants that are out there. Yeah, you come and you talk to us and we'll give you a solution, right? Yes, we can give you a solution, but we're also taking it all the way to the last mile, and we're giving them a solution that not only addresses their business problem, but that enables them to allow for their services to reach the fingertips of their customers.
Nice.
And I think that's the difference.
Yep, cool. All right, Blair, well, thank you so much for joining us on the Intelligent Business Show.
No, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And that's our show for this week. Tune in next week when we'll have Ben Harris, CEO of Decibel Insight here, talking about quantifying digital experiences. Don't miss it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Intelligent Business Show. You can find this show on iTunes and Spotify, as well as on YouTube. And be sure to follow us on Twitter at Aberdeen_show. And if you want to know what's going on in your market space, be sure to check out Aberdeen.com.